I don't know how we can deal with, if you look at an African American among black males, but the unemployment is so high, and I just don't, if you can't address people having jobs that can support their families, they're gonna continue to be very poor.
And generationally, that's the intergenerational transmission of poverty. Really talks about how if you start out with nothing, you know, there's the occasional story of someone really making it and, you know, getting past the worst situations and making their lives go better, but that's not the trending story. That's not what tends to happen. Because, you know, one generation passes the wealth on to the next, or passes the debt on to the next, and that's what we're facing in Milwaukee. If you look at, I think it was in the paper just last week, Wednesday, talking about more children in poverty, and let's see if I can find the page, how it's risen across the county. So even districts like Whitefish Bay, where they're, where, you know, Whitefish Bay.
Even Fox Point had some.
I know, had an increase. So it's, you know, what did they say in terms of Whitefish Bay? It had gone up 3% or something, which for them was huge in terms of an increase. And, you know, it sort of was startling to me when the superintendent in Waukesha was talking about their data points, and, you know, that 10% of their children face, face these kinds of poverty statistics. We're so used to, in Milwaukee, the data numbers being astronomical. So when someone presents that, it's like, wow, that must be amazingly good. And then you're thinking, no, there's still 10% of those young people that are facing horrific situations, so how can that be good?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you know, I was thinking going through the years, and of course, I spent a lot of my working life as a union representative for folks at places like Briggs and Stratton and Harley Davidson and Johnson Controls and so on and so forth. Would you believe that in 1979 we had 11,000 dues paying members at Briggs and Stratton alone? 11,000, and they were all production workers. Today, with the outsourcing that Briggs has done and sending them both to China and to the South and to other places, there's less than 400 production workers at Briggs and Stratton. A.O. Smith, of course, you know, at one time had over 10,000 workers there, but in more recent history they averaged around, and I'm talking the 70s now, they had around 6,000. And what is instructive here is that so many African American families, and perhaps Roosevelt is a product of this, I don't know, but they came to Milwaukee in the 40s and 50s and the 30s actually. Sure.
Yeah.
But the whole point I'm saying is that the experience of kids who were, you know, the few blacks I dealt with as a young person came from basically middle class families, which we don't see today, you know.
I was at a school in a 4th grade class, so the kids were really hard to control. And I said, you guys, if you don't get an education, what are you going to do? And one little boy told me, so I'm going to sell cans. So my point of that, what shocked me about that, where is he getting that from?
Right.
I mean, no dream of anything that's going to improve and enhance his life. He's going to sell cans. I said, you can't make a living on selling cans. You've got to get an education.
Right.
I don't know whether that's registered or not, but so my point, the family background is so bad, these kids are not dreaming about doing anything that's going to really enhance their lives and get them in a position so they can get some of these technical jobs that are available, that are available and will be available. I don't know.
Barry, you were going to have.
Yeah, I have, I guess, 2 different things, and one of them is more of a general feeling that I'm getting from this discussion and a feeling that I have towards a lot of poverty, race, generational things. So I don't quite know where it fits in, but I'll say the first one first. That, I mean, I think everybody knows examples of times you've talked to kids that don't have a lot of hope or that are really lacking in discipline, or are less then controlled, whatever that means. But I mean, I will say, I mean, I think there are definitely examples all the time of kids that are wonderful as well and that have a lot of potential. And, you know, an example of that for me, I was in Barton Elementary School last week doing persuasive letter writing on anti-hunger issues to Congresswoman Gwen Moore with second graders in a persuasive writing class in MPS, which we say is falling, you know, I mean, I think there are always, to every example there is about something falling apart, there's always an example of kids doing it right and kids trying, you know, and so I think it's important for us as advocates to not buy into the doomsday, because I think otherwise it undermines the purpose of our work. And that's just my 2 cents, and that's kind of something I have to remind myself of, but otherwise I don't know why we do what we do, if that's what we think of the next generation, to me. But the other thing I would say, and kind of related to that, but I always really struggle morally in these discussions, and I feel like, and the family stuff that you were bringing kind of brings it up to me. I mean, I have a lot of single parents in my family, and I know what is said about single parents. I know what we know about economic value, but I also think that the middle class, I'm getting kind of crazy liberal here, but I think the middle class philosophy is a lie. I don't think there is a middle class anymore in America. I think that we cling to it because we want to believe we're more stable than we are, but I don't think there is a middle class, personally. That's just my 2 cents. That doesn't mean that everybody's evil, wrong, corrupt, losers, whatever else, but I think we have lost so much structural stability in our culture that we're not, I mean, I think shooting for what our parents may or may not have had, I don't know if that's going to get us there. And I think lining people up for that kind of philosophy and judging people and measuring them against what was, I don't know if that's the correct thing. The other thing that I would suggest, and I'll shut up very soon, but the other thing that I would suggest is that when we're talking about a lot of these issues as race issues, I think what's interesting, I mean, they are spreading. I mean, 1 in 10 kids in Mequon is eligible for free and reduced price meals. That's the leading government indicator of poverty in the school system. And, you know, that never would have happened 15 years ago. But I think what's interesting to me, and I also think this is a moral issue, when we're talking about structural issues, the fact that government is cognizant of issues only when they hit the suburbs or only when they spread to the entire state represents a huge racial crisis in our government, that they're not willing to address issues that have been there, that have been steady, that have been growing, just like they're growing everywhere, but they've been consistently problematic. And they've been consistently really structural for a long, long time. And the reason that people take notice, and no offense to the Occupy Wall Street movement, but the reason that a lot of those people are out there on the floor is because they don't have jobs and because they are now affected by it. But there is a huge sector of our advocacy that benefits from that implicit racism in the mainstream. And we accept that because it finally gets attention. And I think it always makes me unsettled because it's just so unethical. And I don't know what we do with that. I don't know what to say about that, but that's always troubling me. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I want to just piggyback on some things. I don't actually, I doubt that there was ever a middle class. I think there's an only class and there's a working class. Mm-hmm. And creating something in our minds calling us the middle class was a way to divide us from our natural allies who are the working class. Now, I went to college. My parents always knew I'd go to college. My father and his brother and my grandfather, may they all rest in peace, owned a little bakery in Chicago. And they worked 24/7 my whole life. When I was 10 years old, my father took his first 1 day a week, didn't work. Now that's what I call working class. Yes, they made enough to buy a home. Yes, they made enough to educate their kid, if they only had one. And you might say, oh, I was middle class. Well, I only had enough money to have access to certain things. I also have white privilege. But as soon as anyone stopped working, that was it. I haven't not worked since I was 4. You know, I started working in the bakery when I was 4. They didn't tell me it was work, I thought it was fun. You know. So that's one piece. The second piece is the structural piece. And it's really useful, I think, as we look at what happened to black families, to look at what the government policies were, how the only way when the war was over and the good jobs that people had come up from the South to get in a place like Milwaukee or Chicago or New York, the shipyards, manufacturing things for the war effort, when the folks came back from the Army, guess who got those jobs back? Okay? And Rosie the Riveter went back home to the Barbara Billingsley apron, and her husband worked. And the black man didn't have a job. And the only way the only way the government could respond to that was through what had been a program for widows. And it was called Aid to Families with Dependent Children. And so you hired a whole slew of social workers who went into the houses to make sure that there were no men's shoes around. You know, so there was, if you have a choice. You could feed your family, or you can have a husband. You couldn't do both. And, I mean, those of us who have been single parents know how really hard it is to actually do that. So to have a little money so that you actually maybe could stay home for a bit with your children was actually important. Forget about the you know, what we now call the working poor, where those families did stay together, but worked their butts off. And the people of my generation, a little younger, who talk about how furious they were at their parents. So it would be the next generation, your generation, guys. They were furious at the parents because they were never around, because they were busy working, because they had to work all the time. We have a system that doesn't reward hard work, and it doesn't reward cooperation. And to solve some of these issues, we actually are going to have to figure that one out. So when you think about something like the United Way campaign, you know, it's based on the fact that together we can all do a little bit and accomplish some very big things. Well, that has to be how we look at these other issues, including racism, including poverty, that together, and that they're very interconnected.